Hello and welcome to Dev and Doc. My name is Josh. I'm an AI researcher and a neurologist working in London. Today I have an interesting conversation with Dr. Keith Grimes. Keith trained as a general practitioner, but is also a technologist at heart. His path led him to become the Digital Health and Innovation Director at the now defunct HealthTech giant, Babylon Health. He now works as a digital health consultant, advising numerous health tech companies on how to change their healthcare idea into a business and into real-world impact into the National Health Service. Keith is also a very active voice in the AI for healthcare community. Join us in our conversation today as we talk about AI in healthcare, the potentials of generative AI, and also important things about leadership and the do's and don'ts of health tech companies. So welcome, Keith. Keith, you're a bit of a jack of all trades. You've worked as a general practitioner, but you've also rose up in the ranks in health tech, going very high up in Babylon, and now you run your own consulting firm. Can you tell me a bit about your background and your path into health tech and what you do today?
Yeah, that's the trajectory. Exactly. Yeah. When people say my background, I've been a doctor for, it's 28 years. I've been a doctor for 28 years, GP for 24 of them. Most of my career was in general practice, and latterly it was only very specifically in health tech, but I've always been kind of trying to do tech in it. I think now where I am with my consultancy, Curistica, I've kind of finally come to what feels like the perfect place for me to be able to use my skills and knowledge and influence to do the thing that I really want to be able to do. But everything that's gone before has kind of taken me to this point.
I know you're very passionate on how to take healthcare ideas and turn them into something truly impactful and to deliver that in the National Health Service. Can you tell me a bit about what were the most impactful endeavours you've contributed to over the years?
Let me think about that. I think, first of all, I'll talk about Babylon first. Just being at Babylon was impactful for a whole bunch of different reasons. I think the big impact that Babylon had was changing how people thought healthcare could be delivered in the UK. I think other people have done similar things elsewhere, but I genuinely think that Babylon did a very important thing. And it's easy now for people when they look back to sort of say, oh, well, it's kind of easy. Look how easy it is to do X, Y, and Z. But of course, at the time, digital first healthcare, video consultations, all of that side of things, was really quite new, not unique, but really quite new. And when we spoke to other people about what we were doing, and I didn't come in at the very start. I'd been going a few years when I joined, but people were kind of violently opposed to not just the idea of Babylon being a private company doing what it did within the National Health Service, but just violently opposed to the idea that you would ever see a person over video or you would ever deal with something remotely through a message. Like people thought. I was literally accused of being kind of like crooked and, immoral and so on. And of course now a lot of it's sort of settled down and a lot of it's typical stuff. But part of Babylon's kind of slightly abrasive nature was kind of necessary to get over that resistance, because prior to that, when I've been working in the NHS, very little changed, or things changed very often because of some very, correct resistance to change, but some very incorrect resistance to change. So the disruptive nature of Babylon, I think, was one of the most important things. And the landscape of healthcare now is changed, I think, for the better, but is definitely different as a result of that. But within my work within the NHS, I think the biggest impact that I had was I spent a lot of time working in the out of hours sector. I really like, clinically urgent and unscheduled care. And I did a lot of work. It wasn't so much with technology, but it was about sort of the way the service was changed. And I got involved in doing something called the roving GP. The roving GP, again, wasn't a completely unique idea or new idea. It had actually been piloted somewhere else. But the idea behind it was you'd be in hours, general practitioners were finding it very difficult to respond quickly to patients because of the workload that they had. This is back in the late 2010s, the noughties kind of thing. And so patients would end up just pitching up to emergency department or calling an ambulance, and then they'd be in hospital, and it kind of fell apart a bit then, because we could have managed them at home. So the roving GP service was all about, in a situation where a patient needed to be seen, may have gone into hospital if they weren't seen, and their own GP was unable to attend them, we had a rapid response team. So it was me and one other doctor set up under a company called IC24. It's now, it was called Southeast Health, now IC24. We got to jump in a car and zoom out through the day and go see people that were not ambulance emergencies, but kind of complex primary care. And we had good access to geriatric care in the hospital, and we could do more investigations. And I got to use technology with that because I built up a kind of wiki. I was big on wikis at the time and built up this knowledge base. So we used this really sort of strong knowledge base to support us to be really advanced practitioners in the community to help people stay out. And it worked brilliantly. It worked brilliantly at keeping people out of hospital. It worked brilliantly at helping support the local practices. It worked brilliantly at bridging the gap between primary and secondary care and so on. But over time, ended up sort of being used as a sort of soak for less urgent problems. And so its value diminished. But finding that space, I think, was really, really helpful. That was really impactful.
That's interesting because, I think back to the older days of GPs, in the countryside or in rural, like Scotland or in America. They often did that, actually, from what I hear. Out after they finished their job, the day job, they'll still drive around and see certain patients who are unwell, and even late during the night. So my partner's dad worked as a rural GP in Germany, and he would be woken up in the early hours of the morning. The patients would have his direct number and would just call him up, and then he would have to get up, drive over, and assess them.
Do you know what the funny thing is that I've been around long enough to actually done something like that myself. It's gone now, but it's funny because, and it was the west coast of Scotland. I'm from Aberdeen originally, although my accent's mostly gone. I did a lot of my training up in Scotland, and as a GP, after I qualified as a GP in 2001, I did a lot of locum work around Scotland because I was trying to work out A, what kind of doctor I wanted to be, and B, who would let me use technology to do it. So I did a lot of different things. And one of the jobs that I had was working in a rural practice in an island called Seil, S-E-I-L. It's on the west coast of Scotland. It is connected to the mainland by a little bridge called the Bridge Over the Atlantic. And I would go and provide cover there's a GP there, and he was on 24/7. Right, he's exactly like you described, but sometimes you'd have to have some time off. So I would go and do weekends, and then occasionally cover him when he was away on holiday. So that was as close as I got to that. And you're right, I had a phone or a pager actually, because it was quite remote, and patients could either phone me at home, and I'd have a little room above the surgery, or page me, and they would phone anytime, and I would generally go out and see them because it was way easier to do that than get them into the surgery. In the surgery, there was no waiting list; they just turn up and get seen. It was a wee bit more old-fashioned practice, but you had to work that a little bit harder. And so all my gory war stories about working in clinical medicine mostly stem from them, including carrying a lady who had gone into early labor and was hemorrhaging, over my shoulder down a ladder in a croft off an island, off that island, and climbing through windows to get to people, and all good stuff.
Sounds like you have some amazing stories from that time.
fun times. Very far away from AI, right enough, but it was an interesting time.
But I feel like that is, there seems to be basically what you did there was almost like a resurgence of the old times, and it feels like there's this growing burden, right, on healthcare that we talked about, in the UK especially, with an aging population, and more patients are coming in more complex with polypharmacy, multiple social and medical issues. So what did you think was so effective about what you were doing as part of that kind of service, just going out and seeing patients?
Then as opposed to now. I think one of the things was time. it was busy, but there was less pressure of time. If I had to go out and do a home visit, the morning surgery, when I was working in this particularly rural practice, there was no waiting list. People just turned up, they got seen, and then, I do my home visits, and then they come back in the afternoon, or you do some things in the evening. And there was less pressure of time. The patients themselves in the waiting room didn't have an appointment time, so they knew that if someone was taking a long time in front of them, then it was taking a long time. And the thing that when you get presented with a lot of complex information, and I still had a computer system at the time that was actually reasonably functional. It was still about getting to know the patient, so understanding a little bit of their background that wasn't captured, what was in front of me at the time, and then the opportunity just to sort of think a little bit more broadly about, what the impact of the problem they presented with was, or what was on their mind at the time. So it was time, and it's really no different now that we've got less time to actually just speak to people, because a lot of people would feel better just because they'd had a chance to talk to the doctor. I'd done nothing, other than just listen to them, and then they felt better. You can't kind of boil that away. So when I think of all the tech that I get involved in just now, I really try and think about, like, how can we get some time back, and then how can we protect that time and not put more stuff in it, like leave that space. And I think if we can do that, that will make us as doctors and clinicians happier, because we're not so pressured, and we can really use that kind of deep thinking that we wanted to do, and it'll make the patients and their families better because they're being heard, and the outcomes, I think, would be better, and we'd all benefit if the bits, if we can automate out some of the things that we can. That's why I get excited about AI, is dealing with the stuff that we don't have to do, to leave me with the things that I really want to do, which is listen to the person's story and help them understand what's going on.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd agree with me, but the reason I love AI is because it scales, right? So if you make something truly useful, you can spread it to different other doctors, other countries, and you can basically have a much bigger impact on a global scale than you can have as an individual seeing one patient at a time.
I 100% agree. The world suffers for not enough healthcare. The figure that I always wheel out, the 2017 figure from the WHO, was that 50% of people on Earth don't have ready access to healthcare, don't have access to healthcare. 50% at the time. And I'm sure it's worse now. And I know that we will never crack it by just training more doctors and nurses, because 2017 feels like salad days compared to now, and even then we couldn't. And I've never heard anyone explain how we're going to provide enough doctors for Rwanda or other places in sub-Saharan Africa. People focus about what we're doing here. So if you accept that you're never going to crack the human side of it, but you think that people need to have healthcare, like, what on earth do we do? Scaled solutions is the only way in. And that's why when large language models came along, I was particularly excited, or generative AI, because all of a sudden there was this sort of general technology that could fill in some of the gaps in a way that was quite, I'm going to say, easy to do. It's not easy to do.
It's not easy, no. As you and I know, it's not easy at all.
But it's definitely got a hint of being easier to do than other things. And people are able to do it for themselves. And at that point I thought, here we go. Here is actual promise that we can deliver solutions at scale, which then frees up the people that are there to do the thing that really matters. And that to me is exciting. So I agree with you. It's about 100%. Scaled impact.
No, I'm very interested to see where generative AI will be applied and what will come out of it. I think just going back to your career, Keith. So what do you think was the most impactful thing you've done, if you take it to a kind of a grand scale? Is there a single project that you can recall that you feel like you walked away and you felt, okay, that's really had a big impact on a big scale?
I was involved in the summary care record in England. Like when I was trying to get into HealthTech in Scotland back in 2002, there was a program called the ECI program, Electronic Clinical Communication Implementation. And that was essentially using Microsoft Office to do electronic referrals, electronic discharges, email consults, lab results, and online appointment booking. 5 things, things that actually we've got now. And part of it was slightly bodged together with like word templates and stuff like that. But it all worked. But that became the core of something called Sky Store in Scotland, which is then part of what's known as the Urgent Care Summary, I think is the right title. Now, I'm a bit out of the loop on that one. So the work that I did then played into a nationwide summary of a person's medical history, like medication, allergies, and medical problems. And then sort of on top of that, I think there was the ability to have like sort of special notes. Now, England followed up with something similar thereafter. Different approach, but the summary care record, which is in there. And I use that all the time. I had a part to play in getting that implemented locally down here as well. So I can't say, oh yes, this is all down to me. Like, of course, there's very few things in the world you can say that. But that simple bit, just making sure that I have a record for a person who's in front of me who can't remember their medicines. And I'll tell you right now, most patients can't tell you what medicines they're on, particularly when they're under 100%. Stress out of hours. I think that's actually probably had the greatest impact on actual healthcare here in the UK. And the funny thing about all these technologies is that once they're out there, beforehand, people are like, this is difficult, you're never going to manage it, it's too small, that's too little a thing to do to even bother with. And then once it's in place, it makes for a short while, people go, this is great, right? And then it's just like, yeah, table stakes, I just expect this, where's the rest of it? So that is as much gratitude as you'll ever get. That's fine, because I know there were times when I was seeing patients out of hours, and you got this moribund patient, and the wife in the house, and the wife doesn't know what's going on, and you're seeing this. What on earth can I give this person? And I've been able to see the summary care record, and I've seen information that made a critical difference to that patient right then.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've been there, right? I work in stroke, and patients come in complete emergency. You're under a strict 4.5 hour time window to start some kind of treatment. And you're frantically running around trying to figure out some key information, right? Is the patient on blood thinners, or have they
are they on a DOAC?
operation?
Are they on a DOAC?
Yeah. So how did you actually unite all of that data? Was someone manually just going through and curating that data, or how did it work?
No, that was, and I'm drawing back on my knowledge, so some of this might be technically slightly awry, but the basics of it was about establishing, it's all really standard stuff. It's, establishing a common data standard, interoperability agreement, the frameworks by which the data can be exchanged. The move towards cloud infrastructure made a big difference in the sort of noughties. It's maybe easy to forget now, but there was a time when cloud seemed like a crazy idea. Maybe it still is, I don't know. But basically, all those technologies came into place, and then it worked well for primary care, because primary care actually is quite advanced in terms of its digitalization. There was a smallish number of players. You have EMIS, you have System 1, there was Microtest, Vision. In Scotland, there was one called GPAS. There was a really sort of reasonably small number of primary care systems. So you could speak to all the suppliers, get them agreed and get them signed up, and then pushing this little sort of summary information up the way. A lot of the difficulties was getting the data controllers, what you call data controllers now, the doctors and everyone in charge of it, to agree to share it. And a lot of them were like, well, I'm only going to share it if I've spoken to them first. And that made it unwieldy. So there were some decisions made about like opt out as opposed to opt in and so on. And then once you get to a certain amount of data in there, it becomes valuable in itself. It's that kind of booting up sort of phenomenon. But it was... the technology, again, apologies to the technologists, it wasn't easy, but it was the easy bit compared to the people, and getting them to agree to things. And you see that now with the pushback about patient access to notes, similar sort of story there.
But how did you incentivize different data controllers to collaborate and share that data? I'm curious.
If I think back, I was more directly involved in it when I was involved in Scotland, and I was quite young then, I'm not that old now, but I was quite young then, I was just a sort of fresh-faced general practitioner, didn't really know the people locally. And so I wasn't able to wield that kind of network effect. People didn't know who I was, so they didn't necessarily trust why I was saying things. And this was shortly after, like 2001, 2002 was shortly after the dot-com boom and bust as well. So people are a little bit skeptical at that point. What I was able to do was I was able to use a good relationship with quite a senior doctor who had great connections locally. I've forgotten his name now, sadly, but he was very, very good at going around. The talk was along the lines, I would talk about it a lot and I'd be full of energy and like, look at this is great, this will make things much better, and so on and so forth. And there'd be a few raised eyebrows, and then he would come in afterwards, not immediately afterwards, but you know, he may say like, look at this guy, he's full of energy, but actually he's got the right idea. I agree with him, he's helping me out with this sort of thing. That kind of approach worked quite well.
Okay, so he vetted you to other kind of more senior,
gave me a bit of
GPs
extra
and data
credibility,
controllers, street cred, basically.
yeah, gave me the clout to be able to get through in these things. And then it was a matter of sometimes one by one going around different people, identifying, the people that have the biggest problems with this, helping hear their issues, making changes, and so on. Again, all classic transformation and implementation, human stuff.
Human factors,
that relied on some kind of slightly more old-fashioned things about seniority and so on in there. But for me, I've always felt that it's important to kind of lead by example. If I'm put in a position of leadership anywhere, I really don't feel comfortable if I'm not willing to use the thing myself or do the thing myself or have done it first and so on. So over time, that kind of approach, I think, did give me more credibility because I was the person that would use the tech and demonstrate it. So when I said, I think this technology will work, people knew that I had actually spent the time working on it myself and using it myself. That counts for a lot.
Yeah, I guess, would you say that was more kind of leading from the front? Like you're there, you get your hands dirty, you try all the products, whereas some leaders tend to lead from the back, where you don't really see them and they might be operating in the shadows and they may be a bit disconnected from the product itself. I mean,
I think you may be right.
Feelings about that? So
I definitely feel that my approach is to lead by example, lead from the front. That's not to say that's the only way of doing it or the best way of doing it at all. There's lots of different ways of leading, but it suits me. Interesting thing about leadership within healthcare is that I'm very passionate about the technology side of things, but also I think that we need to be doing a much better job of identifying healthcare professionals and clinicians to be leaders too. Leadership isn't something that just sort of bubbles up from inside you. You don't like have some people are naturally maybe slightly better initially, but it's definitely a taught skill. It's definitely something with a really strong sort of background of theory and practice and frameworks. And if we want to get the very best out of our healthcare systems, there's a theory called the theory of expert leadership, which Amanda Goodall, Professor Goodall, is the sort of the founder of this idea. Is that the best run organizations are run by recognized specialists of the core business of that. So, let's use example banks. Like banks tend to operate best when they have a person who is a banker, understands the banking system, gets the top. Same with healthcare. But you can't just take someone and just drop them in.
But that's interesting. You should say this, right? Because when I look around in the current NHS organizations, HealthTech startups, they're not usually run by doctors.
Well, yes. And I think you've observed something correct, and I think you've observed a problem. I mean, the idea that in management and leadership theory, the prevailing wisdom over the last 40, 50 years is about generalism, as in you can train anyone, you can train a person to become a leader, and they can lead anything. You can put them in a bank or a hospital or whatever. A good leader will operate well in some other areas, and people just full stop accept this. Now, the work of Amanda in this, and she's done strong real world studies on this shows that that is not the case. Actually, the best performing organizations tend to be run or led by recognized specialists in that. So I think the example that I was most aware of was when you look at the top 50 hospitals in the US, top 50 hospitals, based on kind of clinical outcomes, performance, and so on. I think I'm right in saying 49 of them have a doctor as the chief executive.
Wow.
Doctor
Okay.
as the chief executive. Now, I could be a little bit wrong on that for the listeners who are jumping up and down, but certainly it's a very large number. But when you look at across the piece, the number of doctors or healthcare professionals as chief executive of these organizations is way lower, in the sort of single figures percentages as well. And all the evidence of the studies that she did across this and in other areas suggests that for many reasons, the performance of an organization, the general happiness of the staff, their own ability to perform and progress and everything reflects very strongly on the basic feeling that a member of staff says, you see, my boss, they could do my job. I trust they could probably do my job. And that simple side of things played out through this. And why I did a 2-year master's in this was learning the theory and practice of leadership, because I was a doctor and I was put in that position, but I needed to know how to do this to become most effective. And I think this is really important for healthcare going forward.
So that was one of my questions, I guess. Do you have to go to, do a master's and do a course in order to obtain these leadership skills? Or can you do it kind of organically or naturally somehow?
I think there has to be an element of training or structure to it. I don't think, I don't know whether you necessarily have to do a postgraduate degree in this area or not, although there are incredible benefits for having done so. I think I am by no means an expert in the teaching of this area, but we could do a much better job. Let's say we're talking about doctors for a moment. This can apply to other areas. Let's say about doctors for a moment, a medical school. Teaching the basics of management and leadership at medical school, at an undergraduate level, identifying those people that have an interest or a propensity or a skill in this area and supporting them, continuing to support them with mentoring, coaching, education throughout their progression through whatever specialism they might want, general practice, neurosurgery, neurology, whatever it is. But then also properly valuing leadership in clinicians in healthcare, because there's sometimes this kind of dark side sort of thing about it too, would put us in a much, much better position. I personally, I don't think you can just you definitely just can't wing it. And I think some people might have some of the kind of soft human skills in there, but I've learned a great deal about, this incredible sort of research and sort of scientific basis of how to lead organizations and manage teams and so on. It could be done so much better. And
so what's the key skill, if you have to boil it down to one kind of key skill or elements? What do you think distinguishes a good leader from a kind of not so good leader?
I think huge amount of it comes down to the very human side of it, understanding people and understanding teams and understanding how one person can work with another person or one person can work with many people, how to communicate with them, understand what they want, what they don't want, and help bring them around. That's not necessarily a core leadership. That's more sort of about management and managing teams, but I think that is an absolutely crucial skill. And those people that do well at it, and some people may have a little bit of a natural head start on that, but your ability to be able to work with other people and have people work in a collective way on something bigger is absolute foundation for this, be it in healthcare or anywhere else. So while I really love the strategy side of things and the innovation side of things, I think ultimately it comes down to that.
Okay, so it's bringing out the best in people and basically communicating and understanding the human factors at play. Yeah,
I mean, leadership, as I understand it, is sort of an act of service and like optimizing the ability of others to excel, and creating the environment where that can happen. It's not about individual glory or anything like that. If people go into leadership for that, then they'll they'll have a rough ride. And that requires you to understand who you're working with.
Yeah. I fully agree. I think, like you said, you gave a great example of, doctors being in the leading seats to run all of these great hospitals in the US. But how about, let's say, smaller organizations like startups? That's the part where I'm sometimes struggle to see where a clinician fits in at the very start. Because I often see, on LinkedIn and in the kind of AI health tech space, there's a hell of a lot of startups, but I'd say at least half of no kind of doctor in the first kind of 5 to 10 members, which I'm always quite shocked about. Why do you think that is, and do you think that that's a mistake? Like, how can we change this kind of approach?
I think it is a mistake. Why
we might be biased, by the way. I feel like as doctors,
a doctor,
do you think we are biased?
Yeah. All right, but let me just explain why I think that. And I'll if I use the word doctor in here, I can actually be talking about a healthcare professional as much as a nurse, a pharmacist, or anyone else here. But so if I lapse, apologies for that. But let's say you're a healthcare professional, clinician. So you have a health tech startup, or you've got a non-clinician who has seen a problem and has an idea about how to solve that. And that person may understand that problem as from the perspective of a personal one. I have a medical condition. It's not being managed well. Here you go. Or from a partner or carer sort of thing. My mum, my dad had this problem. My kid has this problem, or anything like that. Or they've just observed it out there. They've observed the problem. And they generally have one of the other absolutely critical core skills of being an entrepreneur or a founder as well. They got some experience in the sort of the tech or the product, the design or the business or anything like that. And they set off. And I think that's fantastic. But you're operating in the healthcare system. And the healthcare system is a fearsomely complex place that could possibly be designed better and could operate better or anything like that. But still, it is a complex system. You are going to, at the very least, want to know how it operates. And how it operates, not just from the perspective of someone who's conceivably from the outside, I say outside like a patient representative, as opposed to a kind of clinician or a healthcare worker or someone involved in the system itself. It's going to be very, very difficult for you to understand that. Now, you can spend some effort working on that and bringing it in, but that can be tricky, and you're always going to be kind of bringing disparate information together to try and get an understanding yourself. Whereas having a clinician who has been in that system, been taught and raised and trained and practiced in that system, particularly in the peculiarities of one particular area maybe, that is very, very difficult to assemble from pieces elsewhere. And as a result, you can move much faster. You're much less likely to make any mistakes. You're much more likely to identify bigger problems down the line. Now, I will caveat that by saying, just because a person's a doctor or a nurse or anything does not mean they're going to be any good at this. In the same way that you can't just take a doctor and make them a leader. You can't just take a doctor and say, oh, here you go, put them in, they're going to work on this startup, be a great leader in there. Because there's a lot of how we've been trained in healthcare that's actually quite awkward for startups. We get taught an awful lot about scientific rigor and evidence-based practice, and so quite rightly so. Yeah. But when you're working in the kind of nebulous space of a startup with a new idea, the pursuit of that level of evidence or rigor or insistence that it has to be this way or the highway
it's unrealistic.
Is not going to work. It's just not going to get off the ground. The other thing, and this is maybe more unique to the UK than around the world, is working in the National Health Service and not often being exposed to the reality of the money and the funding and everything like that. There's this kind of sense that money should never be mentioned. Money's a dirty thing. It should never even come in to be discussed. But of course, it is the absolute life essence of startups as well, and is a critical consideration. So I think it's really important that you get the clinicians in earlier on to give the really deep understanding of the environment in which you're solving these problems. But at the same time, they have to approach that work with humility and a developing commercial sensibility, and know the real value, like when what they know is important and when what they know is just part of the solution, and when they need to just shut up and just help the other people make their decisions. And that can be tricky to make that transition. And I suspect that could be taught as well. And it is being taught with things like Byte Labs and the like, you know. At the moment, it's mostly real world experience.
So Keith, I think you mentioned the topic of kind of money and funding and how important that is, because it's the lifeblood of a business and a startup, right? You need money to build a business case, you need to scale, you need to hire talents. But in your opinion, do you think the way that it's ended up, so I feel like companies are very readily investing in startups with small teams with a technical co-founder, someone who builds the kind of software and the products, and maybe a businessy person. And they're not often asking for someone from healthcare. I feel like they're very ready to already invest in that kind of group. Do you think that there's a reason for that? Is that a deficiency in their kind of assessment? What's your view on that?
Okay, yeah. Well, yes, I think that it's a deficiency. Okay, and again, here we are. I'm a doctor.
Yeah, not to put words in your mouth,
again,
I assume, but yeah.
Again, I'll give my reasoning, and then people can obviously, you know, if they've got any thoughts, they can sort of catch me next time they see me and challenge me on this. But I think you're right. And interestingly, so Babylon was led by Dr. Ali Parsa, a PhD. It was a non-medical doctor.
Non-medical. Okay, that's a good example.
Yeah. And but still, you know, great sort of background in terms of his studies, but also his business background and everything like that. But that's important because this is a medical, like a health tech company, a medical company that doesn't have at the very top someone with a clinical background. He'd had some healthcare experience, of course, with Circle and everything, but not. And then around him, he assembles his team and so on. And there, of course, there's a medical leader in there as well. But sometimes when I look at what happened with Babylon and some of the decisions that it's made, and God knows I might have made, you know, not great decisions if I was in a position, leadership position there as well. But some of the decisions would have been maybe made differently if there was more in the way of clinical influence at the top. Decisions about like what contracts to go after and you know, which products to focus on and so on. Now, would that have made ultimately a difference to what happened to Babylon? I don't know. But I suspect it might have, for all the reasons we said earlier on about the importance of having expert leader in the situation. Now, I'm not saying that all health tech companies therefore then have to have kind of a doctor at the top or not. The truth is, I don't know that. And I am doing some research on that, and I'll come back to that in a wee second. But you can sort of say, well, it's a tech company, you know, you're going to need a technologist. Okay, that's fine. And if I said I had a health tech company and there was no technologist, a person would say, well, of course, that makes no sense. I would argue it equally makes zero sense to have a health tech company without that health input as well. Because whilst a non-healthcare professional will have their experience of healthcare and will have strong ideas, maybe the best ideas in this sort of area, they are ultimately not specialists in care, specialists in the science of care, specialists in the art of care, specialists in the practice of care. This is something that you and I and other clinicians and people out there, you know, from as long as I can remember, I've been studying towards it, practicing it and doing it. You know, there's a lot to it. You don't just pick it up overnight. And that is critical for working out how to approach a problem, what problem to approach, how to bring on board the other people that you need to make this take flight and live. And therefore, I would say that it is important. And in my dissertation for my master's, I talked about having either a clinician founder, co-founder, or with meaningful influence over the strategic direction of an organization as soon as possible. Okay?
Yeah. So that was my... So playing a devil's advocate, what's the difference between someone being in the immediate team as a clinician versus, let's say, the technical founder and the co-founder is just maybe hiring out a clinician for kind of consultation just a couple of times,
Well, because you can ignore someone you hire in. Sure, you can say, I don't like this, and I don't like this, I'm not going to listen to it. Now,
is that something you find from your practice as a you are very actively consulting a lot of different companies?
I would hope not. I mean, but of course, when I'm being brought in as a consultant, they're entirely right to say, I don't like the sound of this, I'm not going to follow up or anything like that. But what I try and do when I or anyone in Curistica is consulting is use the fact that I know my medicine, I know my tech, I know my business, to translate the important medical things into a language that is well understood and commonly understood without a loss of signal along the way. That is my strength, I think. It may ultimately be that the decision of the leadership is to go in a different direction to this. The trick is knowing when there are red lines and when there are sort of pinker lines and grayer lines and so on. And that takes a while. You need to be more comfortable with risk and compromise in that situation. But to have a seat at the top table, to be able to meaningfully influence the direction of things is very important. Not least of which having external credibility when you're trying to sell your solution to a healthcare system and so on. I think the clinicians who are involved in the procurement will often wonder what input clinicians have had in there. You can sort of tell the difference. In the same way we were talking earlier on about whether you can detect AI's tone when someone's using AI to answer something or post a thing. I think clinicians are very, very good at sensing whether there's been clinician input in something or not.
So did you have a kind of driving seat in Babylon? Because I understand you were the kind of clinical digital health and innovation director and then subsequently the medical director. Did you have much say towards the steer in which way the company was going?
Not really. No, I think I wasn't on the executive or anything like that at all. I would be able to pass on my thoughts through the medical director or the chief medical officer in this site, but I didn't get a seat at the top table.
Because you were the medical director, is that right? So I wasn't a medical director. I was the director of digital health innovations. So it was kind of divisional director. So I wasn't in that position. I'm not trying to wriggle out of anything here. To me that sounds already very senior, right? Clinical, digital health, and then I would have thought that you would have quite a bit of sway, being the specialist and kind of strong voice that you are.
I don't feel as though when I was there that I maybe had as much sway over the sort of strategic direction of the organization or anything. I exerted what leadership I had within the company on getting the most out of the clinical subject matter experts. I really focused my efforts in there as well. So the digital health innovation side of things was about leading what we called the Digital Health Guild, which was the clinical AI team at the start. And the reason for that was that it wasn't just AI that they were working on, it was all aspects of technology. But these were the clinicians that were working on things like the symptom checker and the risk prediction tools and so on. I headed up that team. And therefore I sort of helped lead them and support them, build the structure of how they operated, how we then continued professional development for them all as well, and supported them in a world where there isn't a sort of formal career path for someone in that particular area. That was more where I operated. And then within the wider organization, I kind of represented a kind of clinical opinion and wherever possible used my influence there.
So I saw an interview on YouTube of when you appeared on BBC Newsnight.
Well, which one was it? The Newsnight one with Emily Maitlis?
Yeah.
Oh, that was a rough day.
So that was, I remember. So I saw that they identified problems with the symptom checker, right? One of the oncologists was posting on Twitter and sharing these stories. What was your feeling there? What was it like actually being in Newsnight and trying to? I guess first of all, what was there anything wrong with the kind of symptom tracker, and what was the issue there actually?
I think what was happening at that time is that the symptom checker was, and the symptom checker, so everyone understands, was a sort of feature of the application where people could enter their symptoms and some of the risk factors and some of the
any symptoms. So any old Joe from the street can just engage.
If they downloaded the app, yeah. I mean, it was used with adults as well. There was a sort of pediatric version in one small area, but it was mostly that group, and it was and it would only be used by people in a specific sort of geographic region because you'd have to localize it to a region as well. And it wasn't for use in a screaming emergency. There was a lot of terms and conditions on that side of things, but the idea behind it was that people would be able to report some symptoms and then get two things: an indication of what the cause of that might be. It's not a diagnosis as such, but an indication of some of the things that might be causing this. And an informational outcome is the language that was used, and then a sort of triage outcome to give them an idea as to whether they needed to be presenting urgently to an emergency department or whether they could be contacting the GP services or something like that.
Conceptually, that sounds great, and there's many startups still working on this.
Oh yeah, big companies working on it as well. Yeah, we got companies like Ada. So Ada's still their product's still out there. Ada's a very good product that sort of took that further and further and further. I think Visiba has got one as well. There's a few out there as well. I suppose my experience of using symptom checkers, so it was a combination of a rule-based system and then a probabilistic model. Large language models having come along right now kind of change almost everything in some regards, but a probabilistic model was still a reasonably new idea. The idea being is that you build this, for people listening who don't understand a probabilistic model, is it relies on Bayes' theorem and understanding if you understand the likelihood of the likelihood of a disease before you start reporting information, as in the background level, and then you start reporting information, it changes the probabilities of what that's going to be. And if you build a big network with lots of diseases and symptoms, you can get an explainable, verifiable probability of what the likelihood of a disease is. And so you have a combination of that.
Yeah. This is one method in how doctors operate. I mean, when I see a patient, when you're taking the history, you're trying to gather information for your pre-test probability, and then you do your investigation to help confirm or refute the diagnosis. But it is a probabilities game at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the model was built to do. And we used there was a big team of epidemiologists that would use medical data. Once you got this network to establish the likelihood or the sort of the marginals, the probabilities between the link between, let's say, hemoptysis and lung cancer, coughing up blood and lung cancer, or smoking and lung cancer, and so on.
So
and
that
sometimes
sounds good. How
sometimes
did you end up on
data.
Newsnight? Yeah. How did you end up on Newsnight?
Well, there was there's a doctor called Dr. Watkins, an oncologist, and he was online under an anonymous, under a pseudonym called Dr. Murphy. And he was unhappy. He was quite unhappy with how Ali would sometimes put things as well. I think that was a big issue for him, and felt that the capabilities of the symptom checker were being oversold, and therefore tested it and would put in test cases, and then when the test cases didn't go the way that he thought they should, or they didn't perform well, he would post it online and call out Babylon on this device. And for a while he would be posting this, and then internally we had a system where these would come up, and you would identify and say, well, look, is this legit? How would you fix it, and so on. And then there was a sort of process of fixing an iteration. But he was quite vocal a lot of the time, and that over time kind of escalated into a discussion that was going to happen on Newsnight, and actually happened on the same day that he de-anonymized himself at a Royal Society of Medicine event. So earlier on the day, I spoke at the Royal Society of Medicine, and he was there. I met him for the first time, and that was quite a spicy talk. That wasn't recorded, I don't think, but I certainly, it was the first time I was in somewhere like that and painted as a bit of a bad guy, so I got booed at a few points. And then later on the day, there was the Newsnight thing with Emily Maitlis, and Emily Maitlis is very, very fearsome on camera. I can guarantee, I can confirm that. She's absolutely lovely
It was,
on camera.
it was
Great.
ruthless. No, I saw.
Ruthless on camera, and so and so. So it was tough, and people I'm sure can watch it on YouTube and so on.
We'll put a link in the description.
Yeah.
But what was the lesson there? What you know? I don't want to focus on on Babylon on failures, but rather what lessons have you learned and what have you taken to now your consulting business? What were the big lessons there?
I think the lesson that I learned from kind of all of that, maybe the sort of like the public furore over this as well, is I still feel that, as much as possible, I tried to communicate with the anonymous doctor at the time and any kind of critics of Babylon. I tried to play with, I'm no cricket fan, but kind of with a straight bat. I tried to engage them as I otherwise would. So if you and I disagreed clinically about something, I would engage you in a certain way.
Yeah,
I think we all, as professionals, would do that as well. What I kind of learned was that whilst that's still right and that's still the way to do it, in the world of media and online, that kind of falls apart quite quickly. I remember speaking to some of the marketing team, and they said you could write he would spend a lot of time advising scientists on public communications, and then be a scientist, and then let's say it's a vaccine scientist or something like that, and they publish this big report, and then there is some minor thing inside a peer-reviewed paper that is picked up by a person who has a strong feeling otherwise. In the nature of scientific discourse, a person will say, but this bit here is slightly wrong, or you could have done that better.
Yep.
And a scientist will generally go, right, okay, well, it's interesting you pick out that point. We did think about this area. Maybe there was a problem with this bit, in open discourse, which then rapidly turns into, you see, they get this wrong, you can't trust any of it kind of thing. So this sort of polarization of a message, it's difficult to have nuance.
Yes.
Online, things get polarized
Very
quite
difficult.
quickly. So a big lesson for me there is knowing that, and it's a bit of a shame because you want to be really engaged with people online, but sometimes you have to know when it's best not to talk that way. And I think that's one of the things that I learned. But it didn't change the fundamentals of wanting to, practice as well as I can, communicate where I can, understand other people's positions. But in the kind of the heat of online, that can be challenging.
Yeah, I think people lose nuance nowadays, and especially because of the way the news and media is portrayed, and the way, we look at our social media and it's all personalized to reinforce our own biases. We're often very quick to just, to sit in an echo chamber and just dismiss any other biases or other, input from the different side.
Well, maybe I can sort of bring it back a little bit and just say that one of the values, the 6 values that I think of with Curistica, I spent time thinking about them. I won't go through them all just now, but one of them is diversity. Well, curiosity and diversity. And curiosity, because I'm very curious about things, but diversity is more than just, kind of straight read of diversity. It's about diversity of thought and diversity of opinion. Because the solution to the problems that we find facing us don't necessarily all reside in, well, they almost certainly don't reside in what we've done already. We're going to have to sort of look elsewhere. I take you back to the point about 50% of the world not getting healthcare. And the solution to that is not just training more doctors, because we failed on doing that so far. I don't see how we would ever do that anyway. So you have to think of different ways forward. That principle, I believe, has to apply to all aspects of what you try and do, and try and remain open to different ways of thinking and so on, and trying to take a more global perspective. I try and travel a lot and see how different healthcare systems and different countries deal with problems, because it helps contribute towards that diversity of approach. And always be wary if you find yourself kind of polarizing or sort of really settling hard in one area. But that's tricky. Like you said, online can be a tough environment.
But do you feel like, just going back to Babylon, do you feel like that's something they would have benefited on back then? Do you think it was quite polarized and they were pursuing things in one way rather than hearing the challenges from people like yourselves?
One of the things that one of the things that we did internally was I headed up the digital health governance team, and one of the principles was about openness and about openness and transparency where possible. It is a difficult thing because in industry and in the commercial world there will be important things that you can't share everything, but where possible you want to be open and transparent. And so we did quite a lot of talking about how we built the model. The descriptions I gave you of the probabilistic model earlier on are talks that I gave way back when as well. I think you probably have to work harder than you think at being seen as being open and transparent, I think, is maybe the lesson of that. It's that you can't just throw a few like conversations here and there. It has to be a kind of consistent thing, is maybe part of it. And that's just, but the truth of it is that that's just one thing that has to be considered against absolutely everything else in a company as well. And I had my role in my own domain there, but in the same way that a healthcare professional or clinician contributes towards how a startup operates, it'll be the same with messaging as well, and ultimately the leaders will determine the way that it goes. But
do you see any trends, based on these lessons that you've mentioned? Do you see any trends in the companies you speak to and are consulting for? Is there any kind of big advice you would give or big common error that you see regularly?
I think the things that I'm seeing are, first of all, I think the scene has changed. Time was that a good idea would be funded, or you'd get an idea and get it so far and get it regulatory approval, and that would be a point at which you could sell or whatever it was. Raising money to fund a company has become much harder for a whole bunch of reasons. I don't need to go through them all just now. There was a lot of interest in health tech during the pandemic. It's kind of ebbed off a wee bit. Now markets have got harder. There's a lot of different reasons for it. And so what's happened is that there's a sort of move towards evidence of real world impact. But that evidence of real world impact is not just clinical evidence that whatever you're doing does what it says it's going to do. It's not just that it's safe, that people can use it, all those sort of things. The evidence has to be, and people are using it as well. And I say all of this because that comes back to a kind of eternal truth, which is your thoughts of the solution, the best idea, you think it may be the best idea in the world. It doesn't matter until you see evidence that other people also agree and they're also willing to use it, and the other side of the problem is that people forget to truly build a minimum viable product. They sort of have this idea of what's needed, what's the minimum needed to test this great idea that I have. And I repeatedly see people doing too much to test that idea. They go too far. That burns time, that burns money. And if you're even slightly wrong on that, you've got a long way to come back at that point. So I think it comes back to some of the sort of basics of products, really, is like, really understand the problem. What's the smallest increment that I could do here to test this hypothesis, and then building on that, as opposed to going big on a solution.
Yeah, I think it's about building something people want, right? I think that's what they say in the Y Combinator quite a lot. It's building something people actually want to use.
Yeah.
And, I guess product market fits, but in healthcare that would be, users and evidence generation.
And you know what? You could have the best idea in the world. You could almost literally have the cure for cancer. But if people didn't know how to use it or didn't want to use it, or you didn't think about how it was going to be paid for, it's as much a problem as not having the idea in the first place. All of these things have to happen. It's one of the reasons I really enjoy the work that I do. It's like a grand challenge. You have to balance all of these things. And it's exciting and interesting and frustrating, and requires all your brain cells and the brain cells of other people and the digital brain cells of machines to get this done. And it's really hard. But the fact that it's really hard is one of the great joys of it all. it's why it's nice to be part of a community of people trying to work it out and share it too. So yeah, that in terms of your question, I think, there's this, I think, trend to just sort of like think smaller and find the evidence now.
Yeah, Keith, look, this is the Dev and Doc podcast, and I don't think we'd let you go without talking a bit about AI. Obviously, both me and you have been immersed in AI and kind of large language models. But I think just in general, what do you think are the biggest... What are you most excited for in the next kind of five years from now? What do you think is... How is AI going to change the healthcare landscape?
Right. Well, it's a big question. But let's keep it all simple. I think the first thing that I'm looking forward to is someone getting a large language model into a medical device. Right? Someone cracking that, because the way that regulation is currently set up makes it very hard to do so. But there will be a way into it. And once that gets into place, I think that will help let everyone understand that it's possible, number one. Then number two, help inform us as to best practice. I think some people sometimes worry that the HealthTech industry doesn't like regulation. That's not quite true. Nice, clear regulation that you can work with actually is extremely helpful. It's when things aren't clear that everyone gets really upset. So I'm looking forward to that happening. But that's maybe a bit of a dry one here. The next thing I'm looking forward to is every time a new model with new capabilities comes out, there's this kind of sort of flush of excitement of what it can do. And then people get kind of like, humans get really good at just sort of going, yeah, it's all right, very quickly. And they're looking for the next thing and the next thing. So I spend a lot of my time talking about how people can dive a little bit deeper. And, because I think the excitement is kind of below the surface of these models. That said, I am interested to see where we go next, because it seems like everything we've done with large language models or generative AI over the last, something like a year and a half, I know it's been longer than that, but let's think since 3.5 came out, has been a little bit bigger, a little bit faster, a little bit more training. Multimodal, like the addition of video and everything, doesn't seem to have had the impact that I thought it might. That seemed much more impactful at the time. I don't think people have wrapped it in. We haven't found the right user interface to using that just yet, compared with chat. So I'm interested in seeing that. I'm very interested in seeing what OpenAI does next. Absolutely.
Yeah.
In the face of everything that's coming out. So like you chat GPT 4.5 or 5, I'd be interested to see what comes out, because I think it's going to be an assembly of some novel large language model technology, maybe bigger or something like that. But I think it'll be other technologies assembled alongside it that I think will be interesting.
Have you seen the model on Hippocratic AI? They mentioned that they have a constellation model, so like a group of almost like an MDT team of models, each of a different task.
I'm aware of that, and I'm also aware of people using agentic approaches where you have a number of models and you spin up different kind of roles and so on. I believe the Hippocratic AI literally do have a constellation of like a fine-tuned model here and there and everywhere. And then you've got companies like Google using, new layers with like image layers and a mixture of experts type approach and so on. So they're all interesting. The thing that I got most excited about was like large context, though. All the and for the audience, the large context, that's the amount that can be kind of considered at once in a conversation or held in the brain of the AI at once, kind of thing. And it used to be quite small, and then now you've got Claude doing 200,000, a million tokens with Gemini, proposals of infinite context.
And you can feed a textbook in, or you can feed the entire patient note. It used to be like a stack of documents. You can easily feed that into one context.
Drop that in, And actually, all the papers that I've seen about the performance of using that approach as opposed to fine tuning is much more impressive, I have to say. So I'd be interested to get my hands on some really large context stuff and being able to actually have conversations that persist between interactions as well. I'm a real person for keeping notes. I have a large Notion database. It used to be OneNote and everything in there. And I'd love to be able to have that as context to answer some of the questions that I have. But even some of the simple stuff, I've been very, very impressed with recently. I wasn't impressed initially, but I am now with GPTs, like with OpenAI's way of just creating small, sort of narrow use AIs. And what I like about that is it's a really practical way of me to do things. I write some instructions. I find a way to get a model to do what I want in a repeatable way. I can give it the context that I need and the information and the knowledge that I need, and then I can kind of wrap it up and put it on the side and reuse it. So,
you mean the
I've been
GPT
really,
store where you
yeah,
have
the GPT store. I'm not selling it to other people. These are like a reusable toolkit, and that's the bit that I'm kind of excited about, is the technology getting to a point where people know how to use it to create custom tools for themselves, as opposed to someone else going off and building a big fix.
Yeah, I think that is the healthcare approach as well, kind of use case by use case, rather than having a generalist model that can do every single thing.
But that's tricky, but that introduces lots of regulatory and safety issues. Yeah. So that's maybe the next thing, is using AI to so keeping it really simple. I would like the AI to do the regulatory and safety work on the work that I'm doing at the back. So I create a new use case and it runs off all the material and runs the tests, and helps shape what I've done to be compliant. I would like that. That would be a nice thing to have down the line. So continuous compliance being done on the side. That'd be great, because that allows us to move fast. It's all about iterating and moving fast, but doing so safely. If we can use AI to do that work as well alongside it, that would be magic.
That's very meta. It's like using generative AI to get regulatory approval for generative AI technologies.
Yeah, this is the head scrambling part of general purpose technologies, isn't it? Actually, and that's the other thing, is I'm looking forward to people thinking much more creatively about this. The least exciting thing about AI is digitizing what we currently do. That's fine. I'm more interested in what can we do now that we couldn't do before, either for practical reasons or it just wasn't possible. And there's a lot in there as well. I think that is where we're going to see some really important changes. Not to say that digitizing what we're doing right now isn't important. It will have its important part, but it's what couldn't we do before that we can do now. Proper continuous professional development, where all my consultations, I have a continuous mentor helping shape exactly what I need to do to really kind of like fine tune my ability as a clinician or whatever. That would be great.
That would be great.
Incredibly impractical to do otherwise, but AI offers us a chance to do that.
Yeah, because we don't always get feedback from our clinical work. And also, like, just wrapping it all up, it can also teach you about leadership as well, and not only clinical cases, but
there was
everything, right?
There was a very exciting quote. Sam Altman throws out lots of interesting quotes, and some, I don't know, pinch of salt with some of them. But he made a point saying that out there right now is someone that, the first one-person unicorn, as in one employee company that achieves a $1 billion valuation, is already out there. And hearing that, the idea that you can amplify, remember we were talking about teams earlier on. Mm-hmm. AI gives you the opportunity to have the team that you need on tap. And we've already talked about a well-operating team being the principal lever to achieve meaningful things. That's really exciting. Now, whether that happens in healthcare or something else, I don't quite know. But wouldn't it be great if there was a 2-person or 3-person team? Healthcare professional, patient, AI, working together on a very unique solution for that particular person's problem that's totally reactive. That's a new way of providing healthcare, maybe. And AI opens that up for us. That's not digitizing what we do right now. And so I'm looking forward to people using the technology, having these bright ideas or new ideas and sharing them, and then seeing what comes out.
Yeah. No, I think both me and you dream of that day where we can work, symbiotically with AI in a way that enables us to see our patients and deliver the best care, and maybe take care of the messy stuff, the admin, and really just lets us focus on the doctor-patient relationship.
Well, yeah, let the machines do the work that the machines are the best at. Let the machines do the work that we're forcing humans to do. Like, it's a terrible thing when a human has to work like a machine. That's no good.
But yeah, no, thank you. Look, Keith, thank you for taking the time out to speak on the Dev and Doc podcast. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Yeah, we've had a really interesting discussion. Thank you. We've gone through some interesting side areas as well.
I hope we can speak more in the future.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.